One way of looking at how art changed from the Renaissance as we move all the way through 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th, and eventually 19th century to end up with what we know as modern art. One way is to look at how artistic knowledge and tradition, skills and experience were transmitted from artist to artist. So all of the great masters we know from the Renaissance went in childhood to apprentice under a master of their era. So, for example, we talked about Donatello, how his sculptures really were pioneering this revival of contrapposta and these realistic expressions of human character and personality, anatomy, and a whole range of expressive possibilities that the human figure can represent. Donatello had an artist, Verrocchio, as one of his apprentices. So what would happen in this older system is an artist would have a studio. Now, normally a master of this caliber would be creating art for palaces, for cathedrals, for civic monuments, and these were luxury items. These were not something for ordinary citizens of Florence or wherever to, put in their kitchen. These would be works of art that could take months or even years, and they would be done in a studio with, in most cases, several artists of different ages and levels of skill and experience working in the artist's studio. So there was some, on one end of this spectrum, you could have an artist like Rubens who would have tons of pupils, apprentices helping create his work. And then at the other end, the other extreme would be someone like Michelangelo, who was so uncompromising and difficult to get along with that he actually did away with, I think when he started the Sistine Chapel, he had some apprentices helping him grind his colors and lay out things, and he just got fed up with what he figured was, shoddy workmanship or whatever, and he just was a lone wolf. It's part of the reason why Michelangelo didn't create as many works of art as someone like Rubens. I mean, part of it was because most of his work was sculpting in marble and sculpting works of extraordinary technical mastery that just take years to complete. But anyways, leaving aside that there were some cranky individuals like Michelangelo, generally you have someone like Donatello would have Verrocchio as a disciple. Verrocchio would develop his own career, and then eventually he had Leonardo as one of his apprentices. And then when Leonardo distinguishes himself, then he sets up his own studio, etc., etc. So Michelangelo himself apprenticed as a fresco painter under Ghirlandaio. And then you have like Raphael studied under Perugino, and Titian studied under Bellini, etc., etc. So with this system, you have a continuity, but a continuity that's allowed to evolve and develop. So you have a tradition, and you have scope for experimentation and progression. one example of this would be how Titian's early paintings look just like Bellini. And then he evolves in his own independent way. And you see a similar thing with Raphael's early paintings. They look very much like Perugino. I'm probably butchering that name. I don't know how to pronounce it. But these are all anglicized pronunciations of these Italian names anyways. Titian is Tiziano, etc., etc. What you really want is to be someone like Raphael or Michelangelo or Leonardo, where they completely outshine their masters. And they set a new standard, and then other artists come along, try to emulate this higher standard, and then their disciples have an opportunity to develop according to their masters' discoveries and methods, materials, etc. And so you get a continuity where all the best, all the most successful materials, techniques, and procedures survive, and the disciples that don't cut it, they don't end up setting up their own studio. When you're like some 10-year-old kid, you weren't there with Ghirlandaio or Perugino or whoever, side by side, shoulder to shoulder, painting frescoes in a cathedral. You start up, whatever, sweeping the floors, grinding the colors, priming the canvas if they're painting on canvas, preparing the plaster, and the kids that have some artistic potential, they have some energy, intelligence, ambition, they will move up the ranks, whereas most of the kids will never really graduate beyond busy work. So you have a system, a very ruthless system, where only the best and the brightest creative individuals rise to the top, where they become the master who gets the commissions from the Pope or the King to decorate palaces or cathedrals or what have you. That system in the 18th century and in the 19th century as well starts to get replaced by classical academies, which are not a working master's own studio where he's like a king in his own little kingdom, where he gets to call the shots and he gets to decide who his disciples are, and if you don't cut it, he can push you out. You get to something that's more like a contemporary art school, where these classical academies, most famous ones in France and Italy, but in England and elsewhere, they take the methods of the past masters and they try to transmit them from teacher to student rather from master to disciple. And you no longer have an artist who's king of his own little kingdom, where he can pick and choose how few or how many apprentices he has, and he can decide how much or how little of his work these apprentices are involved in creating, but rather you get a system where you're instructing the students as students in a school in certain principles and fundamentals, rather than being working artists in a shop creating art for what you could call real world clients, whether it's a wealthy merchant or whether it's a bishop or a king or some political elite like the Medici family or what have you. So that sets the stage for an artistic class that's more and more independent from the market, you could say. The cultural elite who are patronizing the artists, and you get a situation where teachers and students start to become an authority unto themselves.